Hi and welcome back to PDA Dad UK. This is the second part of our discussion with Sian Hill on what to do once you've created a demand-free environment as far as you can and you're still experiencing challenges. So as I say, welcome back to PDA Dad UK. Before we go on, please do go hit like, hit subscribe and ring the bell and you'll always know when new content's coming up. It makes a huge difference to how YouTube pick up the algorithms and the way this gets out there. So please do that. It's a personal favour to me. I really appreciate it. As I say, we are continuing our discussion with Sian Hill this week, which we started on the last episode, and that was looking at the theory and the science behind reducing the demands and making our kids feel safe so that we can reduce the challenging behaviours that are often associated. In this one, we're going to be looking at the practical aspects. So what we're going to do is look at what we can do practically that will allow us to create that environment. I'm going to pick up the conversation with Sian starting on that theme. We've established all of this stuff. We've established the, like you say, the cognitive side of things, the learning side. When we put it back into that situation, we've reduced the demands. We've created an environment with as little demand as possible to make life as simple as possible for our kids and for those that we're caring for. How do we practically take it to the next level? How do we take all this and show it practically?
And this is actually the whole ethos of the conversation that we wanted to have together, isn't it? And this is essentially, there are three core parts to this. It's what I called and coined my behaviour arc, but it doesn't just apply to behaviour, it applies to needs, it applies to parenting, it applies to relationships, it relates to challenges, literally anything. But I created it in the context of behaviour, which is why I called it the behaviour arc. And essentially the A of the arc is awareness. So it's understanding what's going on for our child at a nervous system level, because if we don't look at a nervous system level, we're missing a whole piece of what's actually going on for them in that moment. Yeah. And the second part of the awareness is being aware of actually what's going on for us too, recognizing that what's going on for us and how we're being is part of what is contributing to our child's stress, because the nervous system looks to four places for safety, looks to inside our body, and not just safety, but cues of danger and threat as well. Inside our body, the environment around us, the people around us, and the ways those people are interacting with us. So we as parents form two out of those four pieces. And if we're not looking at what's going on for ourselves from a very compassionate place, then we're not only are we going to miss what's going on for our child, but also miss what they and we need as well in order to go through it. And as part of that, we need to understand that the ways that we look at, experience and perceive what's happening, whatever it is driven by our physiological state. You can understand all this stuff and be looking at it from a social engagement safety place of, this is what's happening for my child, this is what they need. Your body could be experiencing it from a sympathetic place of, I need to fight or flight because I'm really anxious, I don't know what to do about this. Like, what do I say or do? Like, how do I respond to this? And at the same time, your nervous system could be perceiving what's happening from a shutdown place of, I can't do anything about this, my life is under threat. The same is true for our kids as well. So first and foremost, understanding has to come first, because when we understand what's really going on, it changes the way that we look at everything. So just the understanding in itself can shift the ways that we're looking at and experiencing and perceiving and relating to stuff and then responding to, just because we have that context that we need. Context is one of the things that our nervous system needs for safety. It needs three things. It needs context, choices, and connection. And connection is connection to our bodies and to ourselves and to our environment around us, and then to each other. So the first thing is awareness. That's understanding, first and foremost. And what I can do for you, actually, if this would be useful, I could knock up some show notes on my website for this, so I can put down the details of the steps. That's the A of the arc. The second one, the R is about removing or reducing stresses in the environment where possible. Now, this is where PDA strategies, traditional PDA strategies, this is where they fall into. But they only fall into one half of it. The reducing demands thing is one part of the second. So there's a whole 5 pieces that are mainly missing, not just within PDA, but within parenting as a whole, that make things so much harder for us than they need to be. So with reducing or removing stressors where possible, number one, we need to understand that demands are a stressor. Okay, it's a threat in the system. But when something is more demanding, it's because we're further down into survival. And stressors are different to stress. So stressors are cues of danger and threat in our environment, around or inside us. And stress is what we experience in our body in response to those stressors. Right? And demands are a stressor. And the more we are living in survival mode, then the more life becomes demanding. The more stressors that our nervous system and body is navigating in any moment, which can be vast, because not only can we be experiencing more than one stress and threat in one go, stresses and threats are also cumulative, more so for children, because they're still developing and they don't have mature nervous systems yet. In any one moment, we, and especially our children, could be navigating a whole host of stresses that are invisible and we can't see, that are placing demands on their nervous system in order to be able to navigate, and asking them to use resources, capacity and skills that they haven't yet developed, which puts even more of a threat on the system. So which means that it calls them and us in order to attune to them and bring our safety more, because that's the only hope they have of achieving safety. They're dependent on us for this sense of safety. So when we look at reducing stressors and removing them where possible, number one, we need to understand that the removal of threat does not equate to safety. And this is probably one of the biggest misconceptions I see in the PDA community, is that there's this inherent, understandable belief that by reducing demands and having a low demand household, that's creating the safety our child needs. And it doesn't. It reduces what's coming in, but it doesn't create safety. And that's what the third part is. And we also need to recognize, like I said a moment ago, that we are part of that environment. So if we're not actively addressing what's going on for us first and foremost, but secondly, building our own somatic, physiological sense of safety in our bodies, so that we're building our capacity to regulate our nervous systems. Because again, there's a whole host of misconception over this. People think regulating or self-regulating is about control, and it's not. Regulation is about being with. It's about having the capacity to be with and move through stress through our natural capacity to do so. So it's not about getting away from, it's not about hiding from, it's not about shutting it down. That's the survival response. It's not about control, it's about being with.
What I've talked about before is that it's something I have to constantly work on in myself. My response to the situation feeds what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
But if we're going into it, like you say, we may have had the meltdown, and how I respond to that is so key, because if I get angry, and I do, and I'm aware of it, and it's something I'm really trying to work on in myself, if I start shouting and raising my voice, it's only feeding into what you're talking about there, that feeling of safety.
It's adding fuel to the fire. It's like you've got a child who's feeling physiologically unsafe. What they need the most in that moment is this relational safety. So from us or from another adult. And if we go in there from a place of unsafety, whatever that looks like, however subtly, then we're sending cues of danger or threat to a child that's already experiencing danger or threat, and we are their only hope of finding safety. And it's being able to safely express what they're experiencing as well in order to get to safety. That's part of it. And this is becoming more and more widely recognised now within parenting as a whole, especially within PDA, is that well, first and foremost, it's not about changing our kids, because our kids are beautiful, perfect human beings as they are, and they don't need to be changed. What they need is for us to be able to attune to their needs. That's what they need. And we need to recognise that it's us that we need to look at and work on in order to help our children. We have this innate need and drive towards, well, I need to find out how to support my child, and that's understandable. And I know what that feels like. I'm a mother myself.
Yeah.
However, we need to understand that the most important part of that is making sure we have enough of what we need, and safety is the most important part for that. In the interim, we need to understand what's going on, and we need to gain simple, practical tools and resources to be able to find and regain a place of safety in the moment. But what we also need to do, if we didn't have an early foundation that gave us the foundational capacity for safety and regulation, then we don't have the foundations to feel safe in our body. So when we're using these tools, number one, they might not work. They might make things worse in the moment, because to our body, they're not safe, they're dangerous, because that's what we've learned. But also, we need to rebuild or build for the first time this foundational capacity that would normally get built in the first 3 years of our lives, that tells us that we are safe in our environment, that we're safe in our body, and that we can trust in ourselves, and that we have everything that we need to get through this. That's one side of the reducing stressors thing and demands. And again, there's a whole host of things there with the more stress we're under, the more stressful experience. So, like, you'll know as a parent of a PDA, like, you don't have to reduce demands all the time, do you? No. There's times when your daughter doesn't find stuff demanding. Why is that? That's because her nervous system is holding less in that moment. So she's able to feel safer in that moment, and she has more capacity.
It's the internal cup of emotion.
Yeah.
Positive, negative emotion, but everybody's got it in them. And for me, my cup sits, it empties and fills. For my daughter, it's mainly close to full all the time. So it only takes something small.
Exactly.
But there are times when it does lower. And so she's therefore got that bit of space there, that capacity to process for short periods of time even.
It's a beautiful analogy. If we use that and turn it on its head as well, if we look at that metaphor and analogy from a stressors and danger and threats cues point of view, then it's in this moment, because the nervous system is like a container, it holds this stuff. It's a bit like a Mary Poppins bag, because you don't see what's in it, but it has a finite capacity in the moment and overall, even though it's a huge flipping capacity. So what happens is these little stressors and cues of danger and threats, many of which we don't notice and we ignore, because number one, we can't see them all. There's thousands of things happening at any moment, and we can't pay attention to all of those. And number two, because also we've been conditioned to ignore most of them, because of the ways that we've been brought up and taught to live in our society and world. So much of the ways that are seen as normal, in inverted commas, are actually shutdown responses, are fawn responses, are fitting in responses. They're not about safety and social engagement. No. They're all about survival. Yeah. So what we need to recognise is that cup is filling up all the time with demands, with stressors. The moment a stressor is opened up, it opens up more. There's a tool that I've got, and I'll put it in with the graphic of it in with the notes, so it will help anybody that wants to see it that's watching this. There's kind of 8 key stressors and needs that children have that not only drive stressors and cues of danger and threats, but also accumulative as well. So at the top, you've got biological, which is like food, water, and your physiological sense of safety, right? Then when that need is unmet, when there is a stressor telling you that you're hungry, that there's something in your environment that's unsafe, or something in your body is telling you something is unsafe, then that opens up an attachment need, which is second on the list. Because as children, they have a limited or no capacity to be able to navigate that on their own. So it opens up an attachment need. Now, what that also does then is it opens up an authenticity need, because they need to be able to fully and freely be and express themselves in order to navigate survival stress, but also regain safety and have innate sense of safety and belonging. And again, they need us to help them do that, to hold that container and hold space for them to do so. But then that can also then open up sensory needs, and sensory needs are fourth on the list, not first. So like there is a lot of parents unintentionally and through no fault of their own will go straight to sensory needs, thinking it's this sensory need, when actually that's the fourth on the list. And yeah, it could be the first on the list in that moment, because that's how the system has learned and been wired. But if there is a sensory need, there'll be the other three above it as well, right? Is they stack, they accumulate. Yep. So those are the four key ones. They're what I call above the line. And then below the line ones, you've got developmental needs. So it's does this child have this capacity? And if they're experiencing something in the moment, I can guarantee you they haven't got that capacity in that moment, or it's gone beyond that capacity. But the stressor from here comes from when we, others in society, look at them or their behaviour or their needs from a developmental place that makes the assumption that they do have the capacity to. It's really, really easy for us to fall into the trap as parents or caregivers of, well, they can do that. Why can't they tell me that? Why can't they do this? Because they're able to in other situations. And just because they can in other situations doesn't mean that they'll have the capacity to in this one. Plus also, when the system is under stress, it diminishes their capacity to be able to use existing resources anyway. So that's the first one, is our demand of our child, if you like, a reasonable and realistic expectation based on, number one, their developmental needs overall, but number two, where they are developmentally in this moment. Stanley Greenspan devised and developed the best developmental phases, if you like, that explains this. The first on the list, which is our first developmental skill that we start learning, is orienting to the environment, and that's for regulation. Now, if we're not able to feel safe in our environment or regulate to the environment, everything else goes to pot. Everything else is built on top of that. So if our child is feeling unsafe, or we are, then we have to look at how to bring in safety, because otherwise we're just adding fuel to that fire for us and for them. So we've got that. But the second thing with the whole demand thing and low demand lifestyle that is really, really important to understand is that, especially when things are hard, when we're raising a child who living in our modern world is incredibly challenging and demanding for, that makes our lives incredibly challenging and demanding as parents too. And like, parenting is challenging enough at the best of times, let's be honest, right? let alone when other things are added in. It is natural, aside from the whole let's reduce demands strategy, it is also natural to want to reduce or remove stressors in our child's environment in a controlled way in order to try and regulate that environment. And what so often happens, I see happen with people when they reduce demands, is that they're actually trying to control the environment around the child and reduce the stressors in order to mitigate the meltdowns, in order to reduce the ways that those demands show up, if you like, in that child's body, in that child's behaviour, in the family life, in the school life or whatever, in order to kind of minimise those. And while I completely understand that, and I've been there myself actually with my kids, is that what we're doing is, again, we're fighting fire with fire, because we're trying to use a survival strategy to navigate unsafety, which brings more unsafety, and it actually brings more fear and stress into the environment, because that's hard work for us to try and focus all the time on, well, what am I doing? Do I need to take that away? How are they going to respond to that? How am I going to respond to this? There's two pieces in with this. That's the first. And the second piece is that when we reduce stressors or remove stressors from an environment, whether it's our child's or whether it's our own or a combination of both, and we're not building safety, then what happens is over time, their world and their capacity shrinks and it gets smaller. So what happens, more stressors become threatening, more things become demanding, and they have less capacity to deal with those things. So in other words, the stuff that wasn't demanding before now is. In other words, what was safe before is now threatening. And also, what is dangerous and threatening becomes more dangerous and threatening sooner because the world has enclosed. When we focus on just reducing demands or just reducing stresses or whichever way you want to look at it, and only focusing on that part of the equation, if you'd like, then what happens is that not only are we missing pieces, over time, that will create more demands for our child. Because it will restrict their world more and ours. When we focus on just reducing demands and not seeing the whole picture, is that it focuses us on the demand avoidance part. And it's like, as you'll know, it's a huge misconception with PDA because it's only one part of what it is. And it isn't, the demand avoidance isn't always there. The other things, the other nuances that are present with PDA that are always there are not always about demands. And when we just focus on a low demand lifestyle, we're not addressing those other nuances. All we're doing is addressing the demand part. The need for autonomy and control comes from a place of unsafety, which is that last stressor on the list. And that comes from a place of trauma. So again, that's limiting our perspective. What I would like to do is invite people to reframe PDA as a perpetual drive for attachment. If we reframe, it's a much more compassionate outlook and perspective, but it also encompasses what's going on for our children. It encompasses the fact that a PDA child has been wired for danger. They have the nuances of early trauma. They also have the nuances of autism, which means that there are nuances in the way their social engagement system interprets safety, which means that PDAs tend, not all, but they tend to live in a social engagement and a threat place, which means that they naturally live in that falling and fitting in place. It's why the social strategies, like people are such a special interest for them. It's why role play for so many PDAs can be a big thing. It's because they're looking for that social engagement and that drive for attachment and for safety and belonging, but from a place of unsafety and not belonging. If we look at it from this perspective and from safety and for attachment, actually it encompasses the whole thing of what our children need. And that comes down to our understanding, and which is what all kids need. It's just PDAs need it on a whole bigger scale. And that's what makes it more demanding for us as parents, caregivers and professionals, because their need for our safety is more threatening to us if we don't yet have a healthy capacity for safety and regulation. And that leads us into that third step, that C of the arc, which is connection and co-regulation. It's about, we need to respond to our children from a place of safety and attunement, not from a cognitive place, but from an embodied place of what does their body need in this moment. And while we can tune into lots of that stuff from up here, we have to be able to drop into our body in order to be able to tune into that, because otherwise we'll be thinking about it and we disconnect from our body, and then we disconnect from not only that innate knowing that we're wired with, but also that creates a threat response in our body, which then our children pick up on. So at best, we're skimming over the surface of what they need, and at worst, we're actually giving them the opposite.
Which fits into what I've naturally come to with my daughter when we've experienced those times, is the need for, I phrase it like a debrief, but it's not. It's actually just a time that, you know what, I compartmentalize. I have to be able to shut off that. It was just a moment and it's gone. Otherwise, it taints the rest of the day. But it's in that she often comes, she'll need a cuddle, And it's just about reconnecting so that she and I are whole again, not
exactly coming together as a in relationship, as an attachment unit.
Yes.
Which is it, like I refer to it as like a docking station with kids. It's like if you've got like an iPod or anything else that needs docking or a phone that needs charging, we recognise that every now and again we need to charge that in order for it to gain battery. Our kids' bodies are like that all the time. They need to, and that's what attachment is essentially all about. It's about us being a safe base for them, our body being a safe base for them, and then being able to go out into the world, whether that's literally or metaphorically, and then come back to us, recharge whenever they need to. And they're going to need that in order to be able to safely express and move through their experiences, and also to make sense of them. While there is a huge cognitive part of that, children make sense of stuff in their bodies when they've been able to be with that experience. So it's when they haven't been able to be with that, they struggle to make sense of it. And you see this all the time in PDA. And this is part of how the nervous system works, actually. It's the repetitive nature of recreating things, because their body is trying to, number one, find safety from a place of danger, but also is trying to make sense of what's going on around them and in the world around them. Most of what we need to do, like you just beautifully said, so much of what we need to do is actually a lot less than we think. It's not necessary. It's about just being present. It's being present without changing anything, without trying to fix their experiences, without trying to make them feel better.
Let them feel they're safe.
Exactly.
And they have promote that safety.
Exactly. Plus, they also have to be able to feel safe to feel what it is that they're feeling that is unsafe. Unless they're able to kind of metaphorically come into that docking station, like, which doesn't necessarily mean physical closeness, it could just be physical proximity. It means that unless they're able to come into our safety and be held safely within that then they can't express their survival energy and move through and make sense of it. And that's what they need from us the most, is our safety. And that's what we struggle the most with as parents, because we've been born into and brought into and evolved in and grown up in this world that's taught us that we're not safe because of trauma. While safety comes first, stability is a part of that. So sometimes we need to put low demand things and have a cognitive understanding first in order to create stability in our lives and our homes to move forward. But that's the first part. And this is true for all diagnoses, actually, because they're all just a surface level understanding. They don't get into the meat and the gravy, if you like, of what's going on and what's needed. And then the second part is we need to have these three pieces together, which are a lot simpler than they sound. We need to understand how the nervous system works and develops, the ways it shows it through behaviour, on what our kids need for safety, but also, and most importantly, we need to start building our capacity for safety in our own bodies. And if we're not learning the two sides at the same time, then it's not going to work. And over time, it's going to get harder. And the harder it gets, the more we'll be drawn to use survival strategies to manage things, the more we'll be drawn to use plasters to put overcuts, because we just can't take anymore. We don't have our cup of stressors is overflowing. And that's why, like, if we use that cup of stressors as an analogy, that's why so many parents and children end up with burnout, because we have a finite capacity for navigating and dealing with stressors. And once that overspills, it starts making a mess because we can't take anymore. So like I said, the three things, you've got A, awareness, R, reducing or removing stressors, which includes us and our physiology, and then C, about coming into connection and relationship through co-regulation. So what we're essentially doing is offering our safety through attunement to our children. And that's why we have to look at us first, because if we don't have safety to give, we don't have anything. You can't give what we don't have, do you? As much as we'd love to. as much as we want to at times.
I think that's a really great way to say, if we haven't got it in ourselves, how can we be giving it out to other people? Sian, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. That was so insightful. I've learned so much. There's been a lot to process in this and go through. Where can people reach you if they want to?
Firstly, thank you, and you're welcome. It's been an honour, and it's been wonderful to share space with you and have this conversation. People can find me at my website, which is sianhill.com, sianhill.com.
Link will be in the description.
I've got 2 mini courses that are very affordable that walk you through both aspects, and you can get them both together as part of what we call our new generation toolkit at a discount as well. So it's like the tools and resources there. Over the next couple of days, I'll create some show notes from what we've gone through with these steps, so that the practical steps we've gone through from the ARC, people have actually got a written version of, to make it easier for them to go back to.
Fantastic. And again, I'll put a direct link to that in the description.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Please do hop on, hit like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell. And I'd love to hear your questions and comments that I can pass on to Sian. Please do put them in the comments section. I will see you again on the next episode. In the meantime, stay safe.